this the cozy, utopian, solar punk, Hugo Award-winning science fiction novel you've been waiting for? Or is it further proof that a utopian tale is impossible due to a core tenet of storytelling, that being conflict? Well, ladies and gentlemen, why don't we both ponder that question over a nice little cup of tea, shall we? Go on, I'll wait. I'm just kidding. This is water. What is the hook? What is A Psalm for the Wild built by Becky Chambers about? Dex, a T-monk, chooses to take to the road, where they encounter a robot who will serve as a philosophical guide on Dex's journeys. So what did I think? As with many science fiction and fantasy novels, I think it's important to talk about world building at least a little bit, because humanity has moved to a world called Panga. It's on a habitable moon, as I mentioned, but a strange thing has happened. All of these robots who have served humans have spontaneously become conscious. So they have separated from humanity, and humans just let them go on their way, find their own paths in life. Which is a great topic to ponder, because AI, as you know, is a big talking point right now, and some of us out there even view it as an existential threat. But Chambers puts a positive spin on this. Like I said, the robots were free to leave after many, many years of servitude working in factories and just helping humanity in many, many ways. There's also a concept of rewilding here, where humanity is more open to their connection with nature and allowing it to do what nature does, and hopefully coexisting alongside it. There are also 6 gods present who represent things like physics, art, etc., etc. However, they really never serve the plot and really exist merely as a backdrop. But as you know, the best kind of world building is experienced. It is not stated, and I would say you kind of experience it here. You kind of don't. It never really serves the plot, as I mentioned. It never really serves the characters in the book. While I do appreciate Chambers' reservations in this regard, it never quite clicked for me, and it never felt quite necessary to enjoy the story. Though I will definitely give her credit, the setting is indeed very cozy. So I did overall enjoy the world building here. I felt like it was a new spin on things. I had never heard of the genre solar punk whatsoever, and I really appreciate that the world building was not heavy-handed. I can see some people having a problem with it because while it is there, it is light, especially in a situation where a reader coming to this new world is going to have a lot of questions. So what about the characters who inhabit this beautiful, cozy world? Well, let's start with Dex, and I guess we should start with talking about pronouns, but don't worry, this isn't going to get political. This is going to be strictly framed in writing craft. Dex is a non-binary individual and uses the pronouns they, them, and this got me thinking immediately. Why? What was Becky Chambers hoping to communicate with this decision? Was she exploring gender identity in the far future? Was she trying to get in the head of a non-binary person to hopefully communicate that to the larger populace, to get us to empathize? But strangely enough, there's only one mention of gender identity, and that is when Dex meets the robot Moscap, and they ask it if it has any gender at all, and that is the last we ever hear of it. So I was left still wondering, maybe the entire point is that she's not saying anything at all. She's saying more because she's not saying anything. She's painting a future picture where gender really isn't something anyone ever thinks about. And so I thought I would do my due diligence and look up an interview to hopefully find the answer to that question. And this is the answer she gave.
For me, it's extremely simple. I write futures that I want to live in. I write futures that I, as a queer person, that my friends as queer people would be welcome in.
That is an answer, but it's a very boring answer. And the reason being is that a POV character is incredibly important to a novel, you might say, which means a writer puts a lot of thought into the POV character. What's their psychology? What's their race? What's their occupation? Among many other things. Because generally, plot emerges from character. So depending on the POV character, you're going to have a very different experience, a very different story. And because I can't speak for other writers, I'm going to speak for myself, particularly my last book titled A Song for the End of the World. This book started as a short story, about 3,000 or 4,000 words. I wrote it for a writing contest. I wrote it in, man, I think it was like 2 or 3 days because I missed the deadline, or I missed the announcement of the deadline. So I had to rush through it. The protagonist was always a young girl. However, she was with her father, and I'm sure I chose that because I'm a father, I have a daughter, so you can see we tend to go to things that are familiar to us. However, when I turned it into a novel, I changed it up. The father is gone. It's a relationship about a young woman, her younger sister, and her mother. So why did I change that, you ask? Well, I wanted to explore the relationships between these three women in these very different age groups. And I wanted the mother to go through some very terrible things that are unique to women, and how those effects rippled down through the generations, how her daughter coped with it, and how she grew as a person. I wouldn't have had the same kind of experience or the same kind of story if I would have left the father in there. No, I did not make them all women for the sake of inclusivity. It was purely a storytelling decision. So I think if you examine any above average story, you're going to see that kind of care put into characters, because characters are the people we see the world through. They drive the plot. So stating that you created this POV character strictly because you wanted a world you wanted to exist in, to me, is kind of a lazy answer. It's a boring answer. It's an unfortunate answer because it's core to the theme of the story, the backbone of the story. But moving on from that, what is Dex's struggle? Because we know that every good character is struggling with something. That is the reason why we follow them along in this journey. We want to see them overcome it or fail. Well, Dex is just kind of meh about the world. They don't feel like they have a purpose. I'm sure you're beginning to see the challenge in telling a utopian story. We crave conflict. We crave upheaval. We crave change. So when the primary plot point, the primary struggle of this character is lack of purpose, that is just not a very compelling one in my opinion. It doesn't attach you to the character. It does not foster empathy. It really comes off as an entitled youth who's never had any real problems. But on a higher note, let's talk about Mosscap the robot. Dex runs into Mosscap on their journeys, and he is named Mosscap because, as is tradition by all robots, they name themselves after the first things they see. And Mosscap, he is a philosophical guide, you might say. He poses questions to Dex to potentially reconsider the way they see the world. But unfortunately, the philosophy wasn't that deep. It was covering topics that I'm really interested in, and maybe that's the problem, is that I ponder these things too much. Things like our relationship with nature, things like what is purpose? Why do you need purpose? And I would have to say I disagree with Mosscap in that regard, because Mosscap explains that robots have no purpose, so why is Dex so fixated on finding purpose? I honestly don't think purpose is that complicated, but that is for another video. But really what I was hoping for here, because again, there is no plot, and I'll get to that very shortly, is that I was hoping to be stopped in my tracks, have Mosscap drop some knowledge on me to just put the book down and think about it a little while, because I feel like that's really what this book is about. It's about being immersed in a very cozy, welcoming world to think about life's bigger problems. But when the philosophy is lacking depth and the characterization is lacking depth, what's left? Plot, as I said. So what is the plot, you might ask? Well, Dex hits the road, being a tea monk, which is basically someone who gives therapy and serves tea, of course, to people who are in trouble. People who need a moment along with a cup of tea to have someone else there to help them work through their issues. There's no rising action, there's really no midpoint, but there is a bit of a character revelation. That's when Dex finds themselves in a cave, and again, they're pondering their purpose, which is very reminiscent of Plato's The Allegory of the Cave, and I'd be very surprised if this was not an inspiration for this scene. But that is it. That is the plot. A robot and a tea monk wandering around, having conversations, but again, immersed in this very beautiful world. And I will definitely give credit to Becky Chambers, because even though there was no plot and very thin characterization, she got me to the end of this book. Granted, it's a very short book, a novella, and I was frustrated a few times while reading it. For various reasons, I felt like there were some inconsistencies with how the characters were relating to the philosophies that were presented to them, how they reacted to other stimuli of what little there was. It's really too bad, because I think this could have been a series of great, deep conversations, some stuff to give you pause to, who knows, maybe enhance your own life, to make you think about yourself, because I think that's what great fiction really is there to do. And I think a lot of this is the product of the utopian setting, or at least the attempted utopian setting, because when you have perfection, what is there to be upset about? But let us move on to the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of the novel. Overall, it was pretty good. Third person POV, pretty standard. Becky Chambers painted an inviting world to step into. But I would say if there's one thing I'd complain about, the structuring of the chapters seemed to just kind of have no point. They just sort of ended. It didn't feel like there was any drive. But again, with really no plot to speak of, it's kind of hard to have any kind of drive, I guess. And also swearing. I know I bring this up from time to time, and I sound like a prude. I swear a lot. But when you have this beautiful, cozy, welcoming, I know I keep saying the same words over again, setting, when somebody drops the F-bomb left and right, it just feels weird. It feels out of left field. It's too much contrast, and it kind of takes me out of this beautiful world. And this also relates more to character, but I forgot to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it now. Dex expresses sexual attraction toward this individual early on in the book, and it just seems to come out of nowhere and also go nowhere because this character plays no role in the plot whatsoever, either to reveal more about Dex's character or, like I said, the plot itself. It just felt like a random aside, and again, I don't know the point, just like the F-bombs in the book. So while the writing was satisfactory and the world captivating, it just wasn't enough to hold this book together, which is why I'm going to have to give A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers a 5.5 out of 10. A valiant attempt at a utopian novel that only proves utopian novels don't work, with a protagonist whose struggles may induce eye-rolling at times, and a robot that brings a unique spin to the dynamic, but who unfortunately doesn't give us anything great to ponder, with no plot to speak of, and writing that paints a welcoming setting, but unfortunately not much else. But that's it for the review. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know, did you read A Psalm for the Wild Built? What did you think of it? Do you agree with me? You disagree with me? It feels like this book had overwhelmingly positive reviews for the most part. It even won a Hugo, but if you've been around here for any amount of time, you'll know my thoughts on that. But if anything, this book really got me thinking about how to craft a story in a beautiful setting where there's little to no conflict, and what about it got people to read on, to actually finish this thing. In fact, there's a sequel. I'm not sure if I'm gonna read it or not. Let me know if you think it's worth my time, if you have read it, of course. And if you'd like to check out my own works of fiction that are not cozy, that are not welcoming, you can check out the link down in the description below. Thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.